Magic's color pie is one of the few things that makes the game truly special and differentiates itself from its competition. Don't believe me? Literally Mark Rosewater, head designer of Magic the Gathering, says the same thing.
Richard Garfield, when he invented Magic, I believe he came up with three awesome things that combined together to make the awesome game we know as Magic. I call that the golden trifecta. Those three things are the trading card game genre, the mana system, and the color pie.
Magic has such a great balance within its color pie. You can pretty much place anything into the color pie. And at a glance, it is very much white is good, black is evil, blue is intellect, red is chaos, and green is nature. But press a little bit deeper and there's more to it than the surface level. White contains conformity and unity. This is why, when it came to the Phyrexians, white is just as present as the other colors. Black contains selfishness, which often leads to villains. But just because someone falls into Black's color pie doesn't mean they can't be a hero, like Liliana in the Eldritch Moon story. Blue definitely has intellect, but comes with the idea that one is able to achieve more than what they might have originally been fated to do. You can nurture someone to be better than originally possible. Red definitely has its ties to chaos, but is also the color of emotion. Feeling any intense emotion, whether it be love or hate, falls within red. Green has nature, but that goes in certain directions that might not be obvious. Nature, you might be thinking, okay, we got trees and animals and stuff that cares about trees and animals, but we also have the natural world and the natural order of things. There are several characters and forces of nature within Magic that only act solely to prevent something that falls outside of destiny. Clothes, the green-red god of Theros, exists to prevent people from avoiding their fate or from achieving more than what they are destined to have. These colors and their identities are so deep, and that's not even getting at how these ideas are translated into the game, or into the connection between these colors. White is about community, black is about the self, what happens when we have Orzhov. So what better way to mess with the almost all-encompassing system that Magic the Gathering has made than to add a sixth color? Hi, I'm Harrison, I run these parts. Inquest magazine was a monthly magazine that was published in the late 90s and early 2000s by none other than Wizards of the Coast. Originally, it had a large focus on collectible card games. Because WotC produced an absurd amount of card games at the time, it was a great way to market their own product. In February of 1997, WotC published the 22nd issue of Inquest. In it, they released a prank article introducing purple as the sixth color in Magic. They even went ahead and showed off some new cards. To start off, the basic land would be portals. So far, that should be a red flag for anyone who hadn't caught on. There's an instant named Invasion of the Soul. I'll try to translate this to modern rules text. For 4 and a purple, you get an instant that has to be played during your upkeep. The way this would be printed today is that you end the turn, and then you control your opponent during their next turn, and then after that, they get an additional turn. It does specify to ignore mana burn on the card, which is just one of my favorite goofy things to look back on in Magic. Effects like this have been made in modern Magic. Embercruel the Promised End and Mindslaver are both colorless cards that let you control opponents. Sorin Markov and Worst Fears are both in black and do the same effect. I honestly forgot Sorin Markov had an ultimate. I'm just so used to its -3. I do think that it's pretty neat that all of these cards came out well after Invasion of the Soul. The next card was Fenori Doppelganger. For 3 and a purple, you get a 1/1 Fenori with an activated ability. For 2 purple, Fenori Doppelganger becomes a copy of another creature. This is straight up a blue effect, to the point where after reading the untouched rules text, I had to do some additional research. It phrases it as the creatures acquire all normal characteristics of another creature, which I thought was odd until I looked into it. The original clone card also phrases it this exact way. So the previous card's effect had never been done before, and would not be done again for another decade or so. This card is almost verbatim a blue card to begin with. The final card that was previewed here is Alosis the Chosen. For 2 and 2 purple, you get a 3/4 legend. Back in the good old days where legends didn't have actual creature types. It has anchoring. Everyone's favorite Magic keyword. Everyone here knows what anchoring does, so I don't need to waste your time going over what it does. I'll be honest, I have no idea what anchoring is, but we can work with some context clues. It feels a little bit like enchanting or equipping. I almost imagine it like possessing. During the upkeep, you can move Alosis to another non-enchantment creature, so they can anchor not just creatures but also lands and artifacts. The permanent Alosis is anchored to has Shroud, so even though we don't have actual rules text for anchoring, I imagine it to be much like Bestow, or Mutate, except the specific card can move itself around. We wouldn't see either of these for 20 more years. But this also reminds me of the creature type Lycids. They're little bug-like dudes that all have an effect that turns them from a creature into an aura, that is then enchanting a creature on the board with various effects. These lists were printed in every color fairly evenly. I find this kind of funny because the magazine came out in February of 1997, and the first lists came out in October of that same year. So when it comes to anchoring, it doesn't really have a spot in the general color pie. It's something that every color could do, which honestly makes it feel more like a general mechanic or a keyword from a new set. If something like anchoring was introduced to the game today, it would be introduced in a new set. All 5 colors would be able to anchor, the set itself would have like 15 new cards that have anchor on it, and then there'd be a commander product that comes out beside the set with an additional 15 anchoring cards. But these cards were 100% intended as a gag. They're a joke with no real plan to act on any of it. 4 years after that copy of Inquest came out, Magic released the set Odyssey, which takes place a century after the previous set of Apocalypse. The world of Dominaria has been drastically changed, and R&D briefly thought about introducing purple to represent how weird the world is now, but that was quickly scrapped in favor of graveyard interactions. 6 years after that brief stint where Magic flirted with bringing purple into the game, we had Planar Chaos. Oh, how I love to talk about this block. Planar Chaos is in a block called Time Spiral. Basically, stuff is wonky. That's as much as you really need to know of the lore here. The first set highlighted Magic's past, the final set prophesized what Magic would look like into the future, but this middle set, Planar Chaos, that was here and now. Well, maybe not here, but definitely now. The set of Planar Chaos was designed to demonstrate an alternate reality to Magic. Ultimately, Magic decided to represent this alternate reality by shifting colors. There are some iconic cards from Magic's history that could technically work in another color. Take Wrath of God for example. Destroy all creatures, they can't be regenerated. A staple in white board wipes. Well, black can also do this effect, so we got Damnation. The same effect and basically the same flavor. The main difference basically being a perspective switch. They did a ton of these and they're absolutely a hoot. I highly recommend looking through color shifted cards because it almost feels like a parody of Magic. It kind of shows that with the color wheel, sometimes colors aren't complete opposites of each other. Sometimes they rhyme. But before Magic R&D decided to go the color shifted route, purple cards were a potential method to also achieve the same effect of representing an alternative reality. A month before the set would actually release, Paul Sotosanti, one of the designers who worked on the actual set, released an article talking about how purple was seriously considered. There was a big challenge on how you reflect this with commons and uncommons. In Magic, there's a design question that gets asked a lot. Anytime a set does something special, like having a lot of planeswalkers like in War of the Spark, or having a lot of dragons in Dragonstar Kier, it's easy to produce mythics and rares for it, but you need to think of what the commons and uncommons are going to look like. Along with color shifted cards, which they'd eventually use, they also pitched a few other things like modal cards, a new card type, and eventually purple. When it came to purple, there were about 4 ways that they decided they could properly implement it. They wanted it to feel just like one of the other colors, but this is kind of difficult to pull off when everything is practically already claimed by the color pie. The first solution was to make purple able to do everything, but just not great at anything, like a jack of all trades. The problem with that is nobody wants to run purple if it's just a bad version of everything. Another solution is that Magic had a few minor abilities that haven't really had a home in a single color, or haven't been used in a while, so take them off the shelf and give them the purple. The third solution was have purple really heavily lean into how time is wonky in this set. They had previously established other cards that care about time in the form of time counters, so they could play around with that, but they could also play around with turn order, or even phases. The fourth possible solution was kinda like the first. You just have purple encroach on every other color's territory, and have those colors just unable to do that this set. Since it was only going to be one set, you could give purple discard and counter spells and life gain and haste and trample, and not let the other colors do it just this time. And the fifth solution was just to take bits and pieces of all the other solutions and mash them together. But implementing a 6th color into Magic was harder than it sounded. For one, they had to work out the logistics for mana bases. The Inquest magazine had portals as their purple lands, but by the time we got to this set, they were thinking either caves or cities. Well-established players would already have a ton of each basic land. Some even have their own favorites and have collected a ton of them. But here, you're implementing a 6th basic that everyone is going to want and need, which brings with it its own problems. As development went on, they further decided to go with the variant of option 4, and to place purple in between blue and black in the color wheel. For that set, purple would be the color that would counter spells and force opponents to discard. It also offered an interesting spin on the color pie. In a 5-color color pie, each color has 2 allies and 2 enemies. Whereas with a 6-color color pie, each color has 2 allies and only 1 enemy, which frankly makes sense. White's enemies are red and black, when it definitely feels like black fits that bill a lot more than red does. Under this new color pie, white would be solely enemies with black, blue would be solely enemies with red, and green would be solely enemies with purple. I have often found how annoying it is that a lot of Magic exists on this X and Y axis between black and white and then red and blue, and how green frequently just feels like this 5th wheel. Adding purple to this adds a neat little Z axis. This also offered a very exciting potential design. Magic at this point had its reserve list, but also had a slew of super powerful cards that players wanted reprinted, but Magic felt like they had no really good way of reprinting them. In 2007, practically everything they printed went right into Standard, so if players are demanding that they want a card like Mana Drain to be reprinted, you couldn't just wait for the next Modern Horizons or Masters set. These format warping cards shouldn't just be thrown into Standard to destroy the meta for the next 2 years. So, Purple offered an interesting alternative. The idea was to take all those cards that they wanted to print but were too powerful and then make these new versions of them purple. The list that Paul Sotosanti mentions includes Mana Drain, Fire Blast, Hinterturak, Rancor, Land Tax, Land Grant, Sylvan Library, and Dark Ritual. A lot of these cards are still looked back on today as all-time great Magic cards, and they still put in a lot of work in Commander. If you were to just throw them into Standard, that could completely warp the format so fast. Not to mention, collectors in earlier Magic's history were very vocal about not wanting to lose the value they had in their cards. By making these new versions of these cards purple, they were also addressing an additional problem in playability. One of the biggest problems having a 6th color is that every other color is going to have so many more cards than it. This was 2007. White, blue, black, red, and green had already been receiving cards for almost 15 years at that point. Purple needed to catch up in several ways. Not to mention they fully intended this color to only show up in a single set for the time. So this means that in the very next set, every other color was going to get new cards except for purple. But purple would still have to compete in Standard against these colors. If you drastically make purple a lot more powerful just for this set, you can increase the odds it'll still see play in about a year. The design team was in love with this idea. There had already been rumors and jokes about Magic adding a 6th color, and this was seen as the best way to go about adding one. So they started testing it. A few more details were ironed out. They dropped the discard theme because mono purple decks felt too similar to typical blue-black decks. They replaced discard with direct damage. Ironically, purple was now becoming a mix of red and blue. To make it stand out, they also made purple better at countering spells, giving it hard counters, and then demoting blue to counters like Force Spike. But they also want to make purple good at removing enchantments. They did some testing, and it wasn't fun to play around with. So they went back to the drawing board. They played around with adding edicts into purple's color pie. They continued playing around, adding new things, taking stuff from other colors, but they just got to a point where if they were going to make a 6th color, it shouldn't have to steal from the other 5. It should be its own thing. Mark Roser states that if they were going to make a 6th color now, it'd have to do something in design and mechanics that no other color could ever do. Constant redesigns and revisions and edits just made all of the momentum and passion they had for purple slowed down. And then they eventually decided that color shifted cards were just a better approach. As an epilogue to the story of purple, 9 years later, Magic released the set Oath of the Gatewatch. The set in which the Gatewatch is formed and defeats 2 of the Eldrazi Titans. But more importantly, the colorless Pip was introduced. The colorless Eldrazi of the set stole a little bit from every color, but also produced cards that the other colors could only imagine. It truly became Magic's honorary 6th color, even if, by definition, it isn't a color. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to bolt your birds.